Welcome to SIM-PAC Live. I'm your host Jeff Matthews, and today we interview Rowan Moorey, Senior Researcher Beyond Zero Emissions. Rowan was one of the authors of the Beyond Zero Emissions report, Make It Here, Building Australia's Clean Industrial Future. I love the ambition of the report, go big or go home. I did have some questions, however, so I was grateful for the opportunity to talk directly to one of the authors of the report. Welcome, Rowan. Look, thank you for making it today. Thank you, Rowan. You're one of the authors of this great report, very timely report, Making It Here, Building Australia's Clean Industrial Future. Now, in the beginning of the report, you put some really attractive numbers out there you're saying that by boosting Australian manufacturing capability and growing just 5 onshore cleantech supply chains, that we could generate up to $215 billion in revenue and create 53,000 additional jobs by 2035. Now, to put that in context, because I look at that and I know some people may think that's a big number and ambitious, and I look at it and I go, it's not so big. We're going to have to do that. I want to put up now for the viewers to see your chart that's in your report, and talk through some of the numbers. So the chart's coming up now, and people can see this is the global forecast for clean tech demand growth. There's 10,400 gigawatts of solar, and I love the way you've put this into context. You know, it's 1.2 billion household system. Now, by the way, this is for 2035. So we've got a 1.2 billion household solar systems globally. We've got to install enough wind to which is the equivalent of 68 times the Australians' current energy grid. We've got to have the equivalent of 560 million home batteries, and 323 million households have got to get heat pumps. And then we've got to put nearly 1 billion vehicles on the road, electric vehicles on the road. So when I look at those global numbers, it actually scares the crap out of me. It's only 11 years away. And, 2035, it was 2050, we put these numbers out there, but when you start to think, it's only 11 years away. And it scares the crap out of me for 2 reasons. And one is that the IEA published a report last year, and it showed that the average length of time to consent and build one single overhead power line in the OECD, that's the developed nations that we're part of, was 13 years. It's just to put one overhead power line up. And we've got to build all the stuff and connect it all up. And we've got to, in quantities that are just, unprecedented in the history of mankind. And we've got 11 years to do it. So that bit scares the crap out of me. The other bit is that a lot of this relies on manufacturing, and the biggest barrier to entry for manufacturing is the cost of tooling up. Always has been and always will. And those are 2 factors that really, scare me. We look at the global picture. But I want to come back to your revenue and your job figures, because I've no doubt those jobs will be there and that revenue will be there. And in fact, I like to flip the coin and look at it the other way, is what is the cost of lost opportunity? Because if we don't do it, we would have to import all this stuff, and it's got to have a margin on it, and it's not going to provide any jobs, and it's all our revenue going overseas. So there's a double side to this cost. Is what is the cost of lost opportunity on top of that? It could get really expensive for us.
Well, I guess we are seeing these global supply chains scaling up at the moment to meet clean technology demands in the USA, China, and Europe, and these major economies are heavily subsidizing their industries. And so what we're focused on is how can we make sure our domestic market can support, with a sovereign capability, enough manufacturing capacity across the clean technologies that we know we're going to need to decarbonize our economy. And wind, solar, heat pumps, hydrogen, and how can we make sure that these supply chains grow in Australia and provide revenue for the Australian economy. And as you've said, if that 215 billion might not be the largest economic figure, but that money would be going offshore if we don't invest in these technologies. And we have seen our economic complexity rating. I'm not sure if you've familiar with that number, but that we have been sliding as a country in terms of our economic complexity because we're not doing as much advanced manufacturing. Um, so we're hoping that the government will support more subsidies, and we have seen that last night in the federal budget in
Yes.
terms of production tax credits for hydrogen, battery, and also investments in battery materials and in solar. And so it's good to see at least some of those technologies getting a good starting point and a good investment from the government in terms of scaling up the local manufacturing. One of the things we have recommended though is we're not likely to build all of it here. We need to focus our efforts where it makes sense. And so across a lot of the technologies, we're recommending getting 30 to 40% of the supply chain here. And that means, that could mean things like manufacturing wind towers, solar cells, uh, uh, hot water heat pump tanks, like the tanks specifically, and we're already doing that across a lot of the technologies, but it's about scaling those industries up with the new demand, and that's going to enable us to meet our 1.5-degree targets because we need to seriously be ramping up how many things clean technologies we're putting out there. And I think by having, not being completely reliant on international supply chains, but by having some local manufacturing means we get the added benefit of new jobs in the transition. We get the revenue staying locally, and we also make sure that we can hit those decarbonisation goals. And fourthly, I would say it's also about energy security, making sure that we're not reliant on foreign imported oil for our transport system, for example, or our energy system, but we've got energy security with locally manufactured clean technologies.
So let's just go over the 5 clean tech areas you've identified that we should focus our efforts on. Can you take us through those?
Yeah. Yeah, so the 5 clean technologies, we've got commercial electric vehicles, so that's trucks and buses.
Yeah.
And the big opportunity at the moment is for us to also couple that with our battery supply chain work. So one of the things we focused on with those two is the synergy between manufacturing big batteries for buses and trucks and assembling those vehicles onshore. So we're already doing some of that. We've got a few, companies already operating here. SEA Electric, Volvo's doing some truck manufacturing in Queensland, and we've got Volgren doing some bus body manufacturing as well. So making sure that those industries scale up and trying to build a new industry in the battery supply chain. Thirdly, we've got our heat pump manufacturing supply chain work, which we're certainly the heat pump's an interesting one because it happens across lots of different sectors.
Yeah.
We've got that in the industrial space, in the commercial building space, and as well as residential areas. And it also happens in hot water as well as air conditioning. So there's lots of different applications for heat pumps. And our work with that is that getting that local manufacturing is really going to underpin electrification. If we can't get heat pumps out there, we're not going to be able to decarbonize a lot of buildings and industry. And then fourthly, we've got our wind solar supply chain work. And that the real opportunity with wind has been realised with a lot of investments recently. So it's great to see the $1 billion from the federal government to support solar supply chains. And really, we're trying to make sure we compete in new and novel technologies and supply chain in the solar system, and not, obviously China really dominates the supply chain. So carve out the industry that works for us.
Yes.
And then lastly is our wind supply chain system. So wind's one of those technologies that's very crucial for us hitting our decarbonisation goals. But what we're seeing internationally is a lot of prediction shortfalls in the wind supply chain. So we really want to make sure we underpin underpin that with some local manufacturing. And we've had several manufacturers already in the wind supply chain space that have started up here and sort of, gone a bit quiet. And what we need to see is more volume certainty in that space. So local, governments, as well as industry trying to get enough percentage of local supply so that we can keep that manufacturing and workforce going well into the future. And there's a really big nation building opportunity with wind, and it's, I guess, one of the biggest gaps from the federal budget is there's nothing on wind manufacturing. And having spoken to the Victorian government yesterday, they see wind as a big opportunity, especially offshore wind in the Latrobe Valley, and they'd like to see more investment in wind manufacturing. And there's really I think, a national sort of coordination piece with wind that needs to happen, in terms of building things in the right places and making sure we can get the right investment across Australia to build out the wind supply chain.
Yes, and I see in Europe that those wind supply chains hit some internal inflation and cost escalation, and it almost brought down Siemens, one of the biggest companies in the world. So, yeah, it's an area where they got efficiency by going bigger and bigger and bigger, and
Mm.
and and there's a point where that ends. It wasn't like the solar technology. The technology kept getting bigger and delivering us, almost multiples of capability. The wind towers just kept
Mm.
getting bigger, and that does bring up. And I know it is happening. They're not in my backyard with wind as well, especially with some of these
Mm.
gigantic towers. So yes, wind. But if you look at a wind turbine and a wind tower, you look at it and you say, well, why can't we manufacture that here?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's like it's got components and in it. It's made of everything that we can do here. So
Yes.
yeah, and can
Yeah,
you
no,
take me?
we've got the minerals to manufacture wind, and we've got the workforces that have already manufactured a lot of those components before. Um, so I think investing in wind just makes sense for Australia, and we also hope that by getting communities involved in that manufacturing, that will hopefully help some of those, not in my backyard issues, because if people are involved in the process, if they know someone involved in making a wind turbine, there's more of I guess, an ownership, a local ownership and pride that comes with manufacturing a product that comes from Australian materials, come from the Australian workforce, than purely something coming in on a boat and then suddenly it's in your backyard.
Yes, yes, obviously, and so take us through your report's recommendations for these five clean tech areas.
Yes, so the first one is to provide time-limited financial support to build competitive Australian manufacturing industries. So we know overseas there are a lot of investments in clean technologies, and a lot of that means that Australian products at the moment, locally or even exporting, can't compete because they're not playing on a level playing field. So we can't compete on free economics alone, free market economics. So we're going to need some time-limited financial support, and we have seen that last night in the federal budget. I guess what we'd like to see is, in future budgets, that expanded to ensure that we're including all the clean technologies that are required. As I said before, wind, heat pumps, um, and commercial electric vehicles, buses and trucks aren't included. Um, we also want to ensure there's local demand for Australian-made clean technologies, and that means that there's volume certainty. So, um, what we've heard from, for example, bus manufacturers is that when they're manufacturing locally, they can get an order for 6 months to build buses, but they can't keep a workforce on for 6 months of the year out of 12. So we need to make sure that they're getting orders from state governments and other bus procurements for 12, for a couple of years to make sure that they can keep that workforce on and keep that production going. And thirdly, with a focus on clean industrial hubs. So we've done a lot of work in this space around clustering manufacturers together to increase the efficiency of shared resources and shared knowledge. So we've got 14 sites around Australia that we recommend would be the best places for these sites, and they're often existing brownfield industrial sites. And turning those into 100% renewably powered areas would mean a more efficiency, lower cost energy input, and hopefully higher manufacturing output, and producing also a commercially more commercially viable product if it's got lower, 100% renewable energy. And the last one is developing a circular economy around clean technologies. So we know that these products are going to, there's a lot of them already in the, installed across the country, and making sure that these products don't end up in landfill, but they're actually reused. And that's going to lower the embodied carbon in the products, as well as create a new industry around recycling and reuse. We've got some, already those industries such as steel and aluminium that are fairly strong, but we need to see that expanded to the other parts of what's in a clean technology. So the battery minerals, making sure wind towers get recycled properly, and solar panels. There's a few businesses operating like Lotus Energy, for example, but really there needs to be a scale up of investment in that space.
And I did have a conversation with Alexim, who is recycling solar panels. And one of the things that was actually interesting to me was they were saying that 50% are able to be reused, and they're reusing them as well. So they have a lot out. They've been replaced with higher performing modules, but they still have a role, and they can still play a useful role going forward. So we've got that reuse side as well. Now we're right at that point that I want to put up for the viewers to see your chart about your manufacturing and your and where we start. Australia's existing supply chain capabilities. I want to have a quick look at this. I'll give you my 2 cents worth on it, and you can add a
Yeah,
comment in after me at all stages, because I love what
no
you've done
worries.
with the design of this. I like how it's really punchy, and it's great, and I think it's worth showing here. So first is design and innovation. We've got some really great design and innovation. We're we're that's one area that we've actually got that I think Australia, its research, its R&D capabilities are there. We've got great
Yes.
universities, we've got great R&D capabilities, and we've got good entrepreneurs. It does worry me that some of these the first thing they do is looking offshore. And I'll give you a couple
Mm,
examples.
yeah.
Lias Energy, their new battery technology was sulfur. Um, they're looking at the aviation and drone market. They think EVs and stationary storage is a race to the bottom, and they're looking at higher value stuff for theirs, particularly because their battery has a power to weight advantage ratio. And the other one was Pure Battery Technologies, who are recycling battery material, and they are building a factory in the EU, because they say to build it here, they would be years behind because we don't have the market yet for them. So they're building it there where they've got a ready-made market. So I do worry that we're going to lose some of this if we don't start building local supply chain and
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in the past with like the research that from Professor Martin Green and out of UNSW around solar cells is used that that we've had with the excellent world-leading research around solar is used in the majority of solar panels that exist today, and that comes from our universities. Um, and I think it's a bit of it's a double-edged sword, because on one side you've got an amazing showcase of something we've produced, but also a lost opportunity in terms of that technology being mass produced overseas and us not really capturing much of the value from the IP there. Um, so there's one good example though in SunDrive, and that company getting support from the government to scale up through the Solar Sunshot program. So it'll be great to see how that develops and whether that that local design uh, comes to fruition. They're certainly getting an economic support, so I think they're a really good shoe in. And then secondly, on the design, I'd also like to talk about Raygen here in Melbourne. They're developing novel solar cells with advanced manufacturing. They use a concentrated thermal. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're a really
Yes.
advanced company developing locally, and I think that's a good example of complex engineering and manufacturing, and they're using a lot of automation as well. And that's where I think we've got to play into our strengths. So
Yes.
producing high tech technology is one part, but then making sure you're coupling it with automation to bring down those labour costs that we have inherent in Australian economy.
And concentrated thermal's got the advantages that it could go 24/7. You can they're well on their way. That they're getting some good results overseas with it. I'm a fan of it. I'm a fan of sand batteries too. So again, is that
Yeah.
you heat sand up and it can stay at 500 degrees for months. So I'm sure we've got lots of sense. Okay, let's go back to your supply chain, and we look at mining. We
Yes.
do well in mining, and if anything, the people I talk to in mining are driving towards sustainability fast, maybe faster than anybody else. And I think we've got really good leadership capabilities there, and so we should. We're more than 20% of most of the materials that we'll need for the energy in terms of global supply of most of the materials we'll need for the energy transition. So getting it out of the mine, getting it out of the ground, and getting it out of the ground in increasingly sustainable ways. The electrification of remote mines, what we do with tailings, what we do with waste is I think it's a great story. We're driving in the right direction. Then your input on that, if you had a comment on that, Ron.
I mean, I think it is true. It's highest rated category from us, and I think we've got the vast resources needed, as you said, for all the clean technologies. There is still a little bit of room to improve and incorporate stronger environmental and sustainability and governance standards, and especially a particular need to improve engagement and benefit sharing with First Nation communities. So I'd say, yeah, for the most part, but there's still a little bit of room to improve.
Yes. Okay. Fair point. I accept that. I also was fascinated that there's 50,000 old mine sites that are looking through the tailings to see if we can remine and extract different minerals out of those tailings, because they weren't looking for them. And so there's a mass of 50,000 mine sites. It's a lot of tailings to go through. So interesting work being done by
And I guess just on that, I mean, that's one of the points around our clean industrial hub model, is that you would hope when we're future planning for mining sites that we can try and incorporate as many other businesses to be involved in particular avenues, so that we're maximizing those on a new site, we're not just looking for one particular like iron ore. We're also got other businesses being involved and maximizing the efficiency of that operation.
Yes. And there's also good pump hydro opportunities from old abandoned mine sites as well. So helping along with renewable energy transition. So we get to refining and processing, and we've got some existing capabilities, but we could be doing more. That's a C plus or something in a report card. Yeah. We get to manufacturing, and we're a D minus in manufacturing. Really, that's where essentially these 5 areas that you've identified that we are really lagging behind. And I'll take this opportunity to say it now before we move on in this chart, and it's, if I was looking at your recommendations, I would have added one more, and I would have added that we need to have an engagement to and an attraction to attract companies, to offshore companies, to bring manufacturing onshore. And
Mm,
specifically, we're talking China here. I mean, we won't beat about the bush. They've done 95% of all the manufacturing in the world is now in
mm,
China. China is our largest trading partner. They own a significant amount of our infrastructure. Their tech in most of this place, in most of these technologies, is way in advance of us. And I see, and I know you mentioned it in your report, and in your report
mm,
you mentioned a paragraph about it, but I would have thought that needed to come up in one of the recommendations, because I love the go big or go home attitude of this report,
mm.
but
Yeah.
I get worried about the undercurrent of go it alone in this report, and I don't think we can do that with the and break into those supply chains that China's getting a grip on. And I also think it's a fast track to manufacturing onshore is for those companies to come and manufacture here. And so I just wanted your thoughts on that. I mean, is there a reason you left that out of the recommendations?
I mean, I think uh, I do. We did speak to some Chinese manufacturing company, like Heng Tong, for example, who manufacture large cables. And our discussion with them, which I think we have framed some of the work around, is they've got subsidies across every level of the supply chain for their clean technologies. And so if we're going to compete in terms of our comparative advantage in some of these components, we need to be making sure that we're also subsidizing and levelizing that playing field. So that's, I guess, the what we're seeing, I guess, in the USA in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act is providing the right incentives is driving in the investment as well as the expertise to there. And so if we want to do the same here, we're going to need to do a similar levels of subsidization, um, across the supply chain. And I guess one of the other areas of interest is, can we create enough local certainty that if a company is going to set up shop here, they know that they can get, 5 to 10 years. That came up in our wind manufacturing supply chain work was if we're not going to set up at least 1 to 2 gigawatts of local wind manufacturing, companies aren't going to start making towers or blades or certain other components here in Australia. So it's competing with China is definitely not the right angle. It's about where's the comparative advantage, and how can we attract companies to come here. Um,
Okay, so okay, well, point made and point responded to. I think that I think that there are Chinese companies looking for opportunity here, and I'm not a policy expert, so it was just a
yeah.
question I thought I needed to raise, so people could
Oh no, it's a
make
good question. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, coming back to your supply chain capabilities, we've got assembly, and look, we're doing some in assembly. I know the next SIM-PAC Live is actually going to be co-hosted by Tindo Solar in South Australia,
Oh, nice.
and they're manufacturing, assembling, if you like, you call it manufacturing, and it's advanced manufacturing too with robotics and now, and hopefully they get the benefit of some of the Sunshot program and able to extend, what they're doing, but yes, and we've certainly got the assembly capabilities here, but we've got to say maybe underutilized. Is that a term you would put on that?
I mean, it's a good point about, assembly is part of manufacturing. I think for the purposes of the supply chain of these clean technologies, we separated down a little bit, and our manufacturing section is more focused on the components. And then, we do have those strong strengths. It's the second highest, next to mining. Um, and I think in terms of ramping up that industry, getting more components into the country and mixing that with some local components we've got an opportunity to really grow those home industries. Across all the 5 technologies, we think assembly is something Australia's doing really well at. And it's often not known in terms of, as you would have spoken to some of the battery manufacturers, it's often not known by people that we're doing this. We're putting solar panels together. We're putting batteries together across Australia. And so, we're trying to drum up the drumbeat around the existing industries, Energy Renaissance, New South Wales, and Tindo in South Australia, and hopefully create more of an appetite to get more of those businesses here as well.
Yeah, good work. And then we get to the last two, reuse and recycling. And I think you've used the word burgeoning solar, wind, and battery recycling and emerging capabilities, and I probably agree with those words. I think that's what it is. I think that there's some really great businesses doing some really good things, but it's in terms of the scale of the job.
Yes,
It's only scratching the surface, and it's only getting going. It can only get better. And how do we support those companies for doing more?
that's right. I mean, as you've said, I think you put it perfectly. It's just starting up, and we really want to make sure that we don't have solar panels and wind turbines going into landfill. So we've got to
Yeah,
make sure we scale those industries up in time for panels coming off of roofs. And I'll give one particular example of reuse, though. You mentioned solar panels getting reused, and I think that's a really good example. There is a bus depot in New South Wales, coordinated by Zenobia, and what they did was take batteries that were used in buses, and then when they didn't have the capacity to be used in the buses um, for driving purposes, they've taken them and used them for stationary energy purposes, and then they store the solar from the site during the day and are able to recharge those batteries afterwards. So I think that's an example of, okay, it doesn't have the quite fit for purpose on the road. How do we get another purpose for it and extend that life of that product?
yes, yes. And look, I see a day where your car battery will be able to be take it out and plug and play it into your house. You know, uh,
Yeah,
that's where it's headed. And we know that old car batteries, electric car batteries, EV batteries, can be used as a wholesale battery, or put all together and made a grid level battery. Um, and again, the solar panels, 50% is actually still usable. What are we going to
mm,
use those for? And how do we recycle all those materials? Because the turnover, I saw some figures, but the expected turnover of solar panels coming up is incredible. We're talking tens of millions a year starting to turn over in by
mm.
2030. So these are big industries. They're going to be big industries, and the numbers are there. It's compelling. It's a compelling truth. We're going to get there, and it's coming like a train.
Yeah, and the thing don't want to avoid is, uh, uh, this continual focus on digging these products out of the ground. It's not sustainable in the long term. So we've got to, increase those industries in terms of recycling and reuse. And we're seeing some effects in Europe with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and they're building carbon into their products, and so how that could affect products that come out of the ground when they cost, 80-90% less carbon if they're recycled. We've got that's the long-term future and focus we need to think of. What's the carbon in these products, and what's the opportunity in recycling it and getting that carbon right down?
Right. Well, Ron, look, thank you very much for giving up your morning to talk to me. Well done on the report. Congratulations. It was well timed, and it was a good report to read. And I hope this interview, we've gone a little bit more in depth in a couple of things, and I've asked a
Oh,
few
that's right.
questions that maybe people who have read the report had in the back of their mind.
No worries. Thanks, Jeffrey. And I'd just like to say, we don't need to do everything everywhere all at once. Like, communities across regional Australia are already doing great stuff in this space. Just need to double down on what we already are doing and more of that, and support communities, industries, and business that are set up and ready to make Australia's future. So thanks for your time, Joe.
Thank you.